I'm sorry I'm not in Poland at the moment and that things happen the way they did in the world. So actually at this time, I'm currently in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I am 9 hours behind you, I believe. So I didn't realize I'd be here, but that's okay. So now it's 2 o'clock in the morning in Las Vegas. Everyone's quiet, but I'm awake. So anyway, there were two incidents that happened to me personally that led me to do the research on this paper. For several years, I have been interested in writing about the impact of very advanced new technologies on American constitutional rights, the way in which technology intersects with citizenship, with our fundamental rights, and with the way that we act as citizens. And about 4 years ago, I was driving across one of the bridges in New York City. I'm a New York City native, and I realized that I couldn't pay for the bridge anymore with cash, which doesn't sound like a big problem because they take your picture of the plate and they send you a bill, and you get it at home, and you pay it, and it's the same price. So you don't really have a penalty incurred. But I began thinking about it, and then a couple days later, I looked at a bus map of a county in the New York region called Nassau County. And that county has a very, very strange bus map because the county is big. It's about 30 kilometers by about 30 kilometers. And it's literally cut in half. The north half of it that faces a body of water called Long Island Sound, the north half has virtually no bus service at all. The southern half has all the bus service. And I said, well, this is weird. Why is it that you have a county that has 2.5 million people, that has fairly even population density, that has half the county with basically no bus service whatsoever? And it turns out the people who live there don't want the bus service, actually. They don't want it because they want to drive to work, and they're quite wealthy, and they can afford to take the train. And in the US, at least in New York City, the difference in price between the train and the bus is actually very, very, very high. To take the bus from that county to downtown New York City or downtown Manhattan is only about 2.5 euros, and it will take you 3 hours to get there. The train is about 15 euros, and it'll take you 40 minutes to get there. And I began thinking about these issues of mobility, inequality, and the way in which you have this strange phenomenon where people who are poor aren't just being priced out of mobility, but their rights are being violated in the process. So I began looking at this question of what I have termed MMRs. MMRs are, I think, a fairly new concept, and I haven't had the chance to do the research I want to do in all the regimes they exist in. But what I understood was that there was a key difference between us as individuals making choices in the consumer market to use Facebook, to use Google, to use the websites, versus us being forced as citizens to actually create metadata in the course of certain transactions that we do in our daily life. And I began asking the question, are these metadata trails, are they mandatory, number one? And number two, do the regimes that emerge, do they practice any kind of fair usage in terms of not having a metadata trail? And how does that metadata trail affect our understanding of social inequality? And what I came to realize is that basically in every single instance that I studied, at least in the United States, I'm sure it's also true in other parts of the world, there is a push to convert transactions that historically have not had and do not need metadata into transactions that do. And it made me ask the question, why is this happening? What's happening that something we took for granted, which is the privacy of transactions in public spaces, whether it's me selling somebody something for $10 or 10 euros, whether it's me crossing a bridge that's a public space, or crossing a track or crossing a field, whatever it happens to be, increasingly what I realized is that transactions that were private between private citizens in public spaces, or private individuals undertaking private activities in public spaces, have suddenly found that those private activities are no longer privileged in the sense that they are no longer forgotten. And as a result, there is a mandatory metadata trail that emerges from that activity. And that trail has consequences that are both legal, but also structural in terms of inequality. So I wrote the paper thinking broadly about this question, asking myself, well, what's the first step I can take? And the first step I could take, which I thought I'd try to do in the paper, was to actually define what an MMR is and what it isn't. And what I felt was very important was the idea that we actually can't use MMRs and things like Facebook because Facebook is optional. We don't have to do it as a citizen. But being able to walk around, being able to conduct private transactions is something where we have the right to do as citizens. And therefore, we have to ask the question, should we be required to leave these metadata trails behind in activities of citizenship as opposed to activities of convenience? And what I have come to realize is that a lot of attention has been paid to major social media sites and to the use of metadata for private companies. Not nearly as much attention has been paid to the consequences of transitioning to mandatory metadata regimes. So one of the best counterexamples I can give you in Europe is the fact that, for example, in Sweden, there has been talk of developing a cashless economy where cash is no longer used. And this raises exactly the same issue as, for example, not being able to pay cash when you cross a bridge. In both cases, you're depriving citizens of the right to partake in a private transaction that does not leave a trail behind in some way. And I've come to believe that the right to have those kinds of private transactions is a fundamental right of citizenship, and that right must be protected. So I wrote the paper and I'm laying out this framework for an MMR, doing two things. A, looking to define an MMR in a functional way. B, hoping to provoke a conversation about this specific question of metadata in active citizenship. And that was it, actually. I tried to be succinct, Adriana. I hope I managed.
I think it's very, it was a very nice story about the surveillance regime around us. So I think it was quite, I think, I think it was told in a nice, the nicest way that you could have presented it. I mean, without raising, you know, all the this power antennas that we sociologists have. So let's open the floor for a discussion. If somebody would like to.
Yeah, hi. Mark, thank you for very interesting presentation. We have a colleague here in Poland who does research on on institutionalization of cashless Poland, because certain Central Eastern European economies are also extremely advanced in pursuing the cashless economy. It's a funny paradox. It's due to the fact that our banking system was a bit backwarded, and now it is much easier for it to introduce all the cashless exchanges. So Poland and Czech Republic is actually in this very much more advanced than German economy.
Are there any concerns, Mikołaj, are there any concerns about the metadata trails left behind?
Yeah, of course. But what's interesting here, because and that's my comment / question for you, it's mostly the question of state controlling us. But what's interesting for me and what I'm seeing in this research done in Poland, it's not only state thing, but actually big financial institutions putting a lot of pressure on state and are actually working hand in hand in pressing small economic actors to introduce this touchless payments, terminals everywhere. Yes, so it's all the time optional, but the pressure on this small economic actors like corner shops and all is very strong, and to make it more convenient. But it allows huge financial institutions who gather this money to operate with it, but also it makes state more happy because it's easier to taxate the money which is transferred to the cashless transactions than the cash transactions, obviously. Yeah, so it's very interesting combination of action of a state and big financial institutions. And one more thing, the interesting aspect in your presentation was the possible of this participation in this kind of a social system or economic system as being optional or not optional. Mm-hmm. Actually, it is extremely hard to run away from it. Yes, even if it is optional. Right. Yes, I don't want to have my Facebook account, but this conference goes also to the Facebook account, and I'm not blaming the organizers. There are my colleagues and friends. But, you know, if you want to communicate with people, you have to use this channel. If you want to pay quickly, you have to use your card, because everyone is paying with the card, and the shop assistants, they do not have change to give it back to you. So how would you, and now I'm coming to the question, mm-hmm. How would you be able to theorize it that these options of to opt out from these systems are actually becoming more and more illusionary, and they serve to legitimize that new way of capturing our economic practices and practices of participating in public sphere?
Well, I'll give you an example. I think that there are two examples that come to mind, at least in the United States. So the first one is that toll roads could, in theory, have an option where you could buy an electronic transponder anonymously in a store with cash. And that option would satisfy the condition of not leaving a metadata trail. So I'm looking at the question also, you know, not just in the case of a bridge, but can we preempt through constitutional law or through parliamentary law in Europe, or, you know, congressional law in the US, by ensuring that the right to be forgotten or the right of anonymity is somehow preserved across any future technological platforms? So it wouldn't take much. It would be very easy to actually have an option where a citizen could go to a store and pay cash for a transponder and then still have that right to be forgotten preserved. But I think that you're largely correct. I think that large corporations and governments have a vested interest in not preserving that right. And which is partially why I think it's really important to actually enforce it. I would venture to say that the exception might be Iceland. Iceland, as far as I know, at least in terms of digital rights, has been very proactive in trying to push through the Icelandic parliament something like the equivalent of a tax haven in Switzerland, but a tax haven for digital, digital rights of speech, basically. So I think that what I'm trying to figure out is, why haven't more groups gotten together and found ways to enforce or at least speak out about preserving this right to be forgotten? I mean, through recognizing that this is in fact an MMR or it isn't. The last counterexample I'll give you that I find very interesting and very disturbing is that in the US 2 years ago, a House resolution was passed, House Resolution 1865. And that resolution effectively, in theory, was meant to prevent prostitution and child pornography on the internet. All it really did was ban dating, ads on Craigslist. And what happened is that you could still have dating websites, but you have to register to do them. And what I have seen is that sites that let you act anonymously are consistently punished by laws under the preemption of, well, you might cause problems. So I actually think it's a very serious issue. Mikołaj, I think have I answered your question adequately, or?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting and worth researching topic.
Okay, somebody else would like to address a question? Okay, so I like this idea of the right to be forgotten, and I was thinking, because it's a topic, as you write in the paper, it's also about structural inequality. But I think that maybe there is not like an organized social movement against it, but you have what you might call these weapons of the poor. So I know that, for example, older people were against, for example, receiving their pension by cards. So it's not something which is visible, because, and this is also an effect of inequality. But there was this kind of resistance against. Maybe their problem was not metadata mandatory regime, but maybe the fact that with this. It's not only about the accumulation of data and the right not to be forgotten, but that you are taxed additionally. For example, if you are using these technological tools. So you are all, and this resistance came on the grounds that why they have to pay to the banks an additional fee, which is it's very small, but for them it's very
significant.
It's very significant also at the symbolic level. So I think that this metadata data mandatory regimes, it's also connected with, you have additional taxes, which is, so it's like a regime which is connected with other regimes. So it's not only about
I mean, I actually have a question for you, Adriana, and for the group, which is, one of the big differences between the US and Europe is that Europe has mandatory state level ID cards. So as I know, every country in Europe, for example, in Poland, you have like this, national ID card, and everyone has one. And, in the US, there's actually a very big fight about this, because for the past 200 years, there hasn't been one. And we view at the federal level, the right to identify somebody as a right that does not belong to the federal government. So in some ways, we have a structural protection in place against certain kinds of metadata collection. But I don't know how strong it is, to be honest with you. I really don't know. I suspect that citizens are very willing to give up rights either for fear or for convenience. And they often fail to realize how significant what they've given up is in exchange for that convenience. So I'm quite concerned, to be honest with you.
But I think there must be, I think there is a resistance, but I think it's not visible. I think it's very individualized, and because of the inequality, you don't see it. Because, for example, if you have older people who don't want to be integrated like technologically, but there is a resistance. I think they make a lot of phone calls that they want to get, I think there is a resistance, but it's not because of the inequality. You don't see it, because it's not younger people going in the streets, but it's these older people making the phone calls and going to the offices. So there is, I think, this weapons of the poor against it.
Yeah.
It's not visible.
I mean, there is, I'll add one more comment. There is one very interesting community in the US, which is the Amish religious community. And they're about, currently they're about 300,000. I mean, it's not a small number. There are about 300,000 Amish Americans, and the Amish actually don't practice ANS at all. They have, in every level, they have what's called an opt-out strategy. So they are allowed, according to religious freedom laws in the US, to opt out of almost all current required metadata regimes that the federal government has. So it's a weird way around it, but I think that their example and the sheer number of them that there are in the US is a very good counterpoint to the American push for sort of I would say, commercially driven variant of what other countries do through government. We have done a very, very good job of gathering data on citizens through the private sector.
Okay, thank you very much. If somebody would like to add something. Okay, so I think this is it. Are you going to sleep or to enjoy Las Vegas?
In about 10 minutes, I'll go to sleep. It's 2:00 in the morning, so it's.
Yeah, but with Las Vegas, I was expecting that this is when, like, you woke up at 1 o'clock and.
No, I just haven't gone to sleep yet.
Presentation
It's
and then-
Vegas. It's the city that never sleeps. So,
Yes.
you know, there's I can sleep a little bit, wake up at noon, and currently the last thing I will say is that the weather here is phenomenal. For the past week and a half, it's been about 38 to 40 Celsius every day, and very sunny. So I'm very happy.
Okay. So
Thank you,
very
Adriana,
much,
very much.
especially for your effort and for thank you very much.